Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. My guest on the podcast today is Dan Stevens. Dan currently serves as the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor and Inspector at the Welsh Government. Dan's a highly experienced and operationally competent Chief Fire Officer and Chief Executive Officer. Prior to his current role as the Chief Officer at Melbourne Metropolitan Fire Brigade, having previously served 7 years as the Chief Fire Officer at Merseyside Fire and Rescue. His time during Merseyside had some of the most significant challenges in the history of the organisation, maintaining excellent levels of performance throughout. Dan has extensive operational leadership experience around critical incident decision-making, having been the Fire and Rescue Incident Manager at a number of major incidents. He was the National Fire Chiefs Chair for Operational Coordination Committee and the Strategic Lead Officer for National Resilience and Capability Lead Officer for Urban Search and Rescue and the UK International Search and Rescue Teams. He was awarded the Queen's Fire Service Medal in the Queen's New Year's Honours in 2015. And prior to joining the Fire and Rescue Service, he was a soldier in the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment, from which he was discharged with exemplary service record. Today in our conversation, we cover a massive landscape of stuff. This is definitely something you're going to want to come back to. We go into the origin of National Operational Guidance. We talk about national incident data and some of the correlating trends that we see through IRS. We cast our minds back to the integration and early stages of the Swedish firefighting method. We look at CFPTI, anti-ventilation, and studies on heat release rates. We ask ourselves the question, have we forgotten the original teachings of James Braidwood and how much of that still exists in the fire service today? We also tip the hat to Rosander and Gisselsson's work and take a brief look inside the personal cost that comes with senior leadership. Dan also shares some real knowledge bombs in terms of leadership lessons and the long screwdriver, how to avoid being that yourself, and how the leadership role is to state the destination, but not to tell you the journey. There is a lot in today's episode that I think you're going to want to come back to. Dan is going to be joining us again for a follow-up episode at some point in time. It really was an absolute pleasure to have Dan on the podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. So UK firefighting guidance underwent a complete transformation between 1994 and 1997. Following a program of research aimed at reducing the financial losses from large fires, UK Fire Service Guidance began advocating an American-style ventilation strategy combined with a Swedish-style suppression strategy. However, neither was fully embedded and implemented within the UK Fire and Rescue Service and in our environment, and none of them fully suited what we were doing. So the two approaches had not been designed to work together because US ventilation theories were not based on scientific evidence. Both the US and Sweden have moved on in many ways, and they issued some new stuff in the 1990s, while the UK, we did not embed all this. So since 1995, the rate of firefighting fatalities per building fire in the UK has almost doubled. National Operational Guidance, Fires and Firefighting 2016 is the current UK firefighting guidance. So the reason I wanted to start with this, Dan, is because you did a big piece of work with NOG. You worked very closely with it. And, before we came on and recorded today, you seem to have a real passion around doctoring, training we're taught, our entrenched beliefs. A lot of these not always being based on the available science. Give me an understanding of kind of your background and why you're so passionate about this.
Okay, Pete. So prior to my leaving Merseyside as the chief officer to go over to Melbourne to take up the chief exec position over there, I was one of my national roles was the NFCC chair of the Operations Coordination Committee. Now that I believe it's the Operational Preparedness, Resilience and Response Committee now, but back then that's what it was called. And one of the areas the areas of corporate responsibility that I oversaw on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council was National Operational Guidance. Now, back in the day, through the auspices of what was the Operations Committee that was formerly chaired by Roy Wiltshire prior to me taking it over when Roy became
I saw
the chair
Roy again
of the
recently. I saw him at the AFSA conference. Roy's still knocking about, bless him. He's a funny old character. I like Roy. He's very stern, though.
Roy is a solid citizen, Peter. Roy is he's in His Majesty's
Inspectorate still, yeah. He's doing police and crime stuff as well now, isn't he? He's doing all of it, yeah.
Well, part of the difference, if you like, between the role that Roy has in England and the role that I have in Wales, for all intents and purposes, the fire aspects are the same. But my role does not extend to policing, whereas in England, as you say, it's HMIC FRS is the police service and the fire and rescue service. Hence, Roy's scope is far broader than that, which I cover. So, but to go back to the if you look at the origins of National Operational Guidance, it sort of dates back to around, I'm going to say 2014. You have to forgive me, Pete, my memory isn't what it once was, but I'm going to say it would have been around that time. So back in the day, the HMI for fire, when fire was under the Home Office, and then I guess more latterly it would have been ODPM, DCLG, and all the various different iterations thereafter. So prior to it coming back into the Home Office around 2016, the responsibility for the production of guidance rested with the HMI. So that would be the legacy, the red books, the manuals of firemanship, as they were called back in the day.
I've got one of them old here from 1985. I've got the the fire service drill book next to my laptop now.
The drill book, now known as the Fire and Rescue Service Training and Development Manual, and if you need me to, I can probably quote all of the individual standard practices, drills and techniques, but maybe come on to that later.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
The HMI had responsibility for the production of our national guidance. So essentially was the manuals of firemanship, more latterly became fire service manuals with different volumes. And we'll maybe speak about a little bit about some of that a little later. But the responsibility with the removal of the HMI, in England, there was the introduction then of the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor. The first Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor was Sir Ken Knight, and then right after it was Peter Holland, one of my former colleagues from the Northwest. And the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisors unit then took on responsibility for the production of guidance. And one of the products that they delivered or that they inherited and oversaw was the generic risk assessments, the GRAs. It is probably fair to say that the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisors unit was probably not as well funded as the HMI, well established or funded as the HMI was, and therefore I think it's fair to say it became increasingly more challenging for Peter Holland to maintain the guidance, and that was something that was recognised throughout the sector, and that along with a sort of a shift in thinking around the sector taking more professional ownership, professional responsibility, is ultimately what was Chief Fire Officers Association then became National Fire Chiefs Council. That transition, part of that was the creation of National Operational Guidance and the NOG programme through what is now the Central Programme Office. And that would never have happened if that were not for the support of Ron Dobson, the Commissioner of London at the time. And London funded that to the tune of, I'm going to say it was around £3 million to get that started.
Wow.
So the likes of myself, Roy Wiltshire, Ron clearly, and others, we were very much instrumental in the progression of the development of NOG from the get-go. Essentially, what NOG is, if you in the most simple terms, it is hazard and risk control statements, which essentially was what the GLAs are, and they are written in order to allow for policy writers at the local level to then produce their own, what should be a standardised doctrine based on fairly generic hazards and hazard knowledge, control measure knowledge.
And then gives them freedom for the tactical deployment of that through their available resources, because that's the unique aspect, isn't it? The local fire and rescue services have different assets, different budgets, different equipment that they've purchased, and the geographical challenges are obviously very different as well.
Completely, Pete, completely. So there was, as a chief officer heavily involved in ops back in the day, there was in the Northwest, for example, we produced standard operational procedures aligned to the GRA index. And I think there was a view among some of my colleagues, or a wish that, probably for some of the services that were maybe less well resourced, essentially asking, can you write our SOP? Can you not write national SOPs? Yeah. My response to that always was, if we put aside the terminology of standard operational procedure for a second, and if we just indulge me and substitute that for operational risk assessment, then the hazard knowledge and the control measure knowledge for all reasonably foreseeable incident types should be based on evidence, science, research, should be fairly standard, should be well accepted. And theoretically, at least, you should be able to produce a national or indeed international/worldwide basis, a set of generic operational risk assessments in the fire and rescue space. And I say that, having had experience in Australia, let me tell you, Pete, the fires in Australia behaved exactly the same way as the fires do here. And the American research, Dutch research, shows that the fires in America and in the Netherlands behave exactly the same as well, because they're governed by science, and we really shouldn't be surprised by that.
So, yes, but there's a very difficult link. You've just jumped a chasm, I feel, and I'd be remiss if I didn't challenge on behalf of the listener and myself as well. Based on science, they behave the same, but with an absence of deep understanding, or at least a visceral understanding of the science behind fire, as one example of the operations of the fire and rescue service. Buildings, an example. Buildings are all constructed very differently, different materials across the world. So when we say building fire, and this is just one very small example, they'll behave the same based on the science of how fire behaves. But as you look at it, zoom out and look at it as the building on fire and the ventilation profile, the size of compartments and all that sort of stuff. And please tell me if I'm talking out of my arse, because of course I'm stuck inside my own internal bias from my own teachings and experiences. They don't behave the same when you layer it with all of those aspects. Or am I completely wrong there?
So I think... Can we hold that thought, Pete? Can we come back to that?
I'll stick a pin in that and then circle back.
If we just finish to the generic hazard knowledge, control measure knowledge, being the same the world over. And we will definitely come back to your point, because it's a really good point, and I really do want to come back to that. What I would say is, I believe that you could produce, again, on a generic basis, a menu of tactical options or control measure tactics, which is the terminology that I prefer to use, certainly when developing the Merseyside standard operational procedures, which essentially were predicated on this operational risk assessment, hazard knowledge, control measure tactics. So that menu of tactical options, which in of itself is in the end would be finite. There would be a finite number of tactical options, depending on the level at which the detail, the granularity you wanted to go to. So, for example, offensive exterior attack, generic term for straight stream, steep angle through a window, an exterior window, right the way through to high pressure misting system. It's essentially an offensive exterior attack, but it's an arguably different tactic. You take the point. You could produce that menu of tactical options, which then the local policy writer, absolutely as you said, can then select from those tactical options based on the local resource, all of the factors that you talked about. And that, for me, is in this space, that's probably the holy grail in respect of standardisation and the achievement of consistency, interoperability, service to service, and so forth. And that was certainly always, I guess, what I was trying to. That's what I've always advocated, and what it is that I've always tried to achieve. And ultimately, that would be determined through the service's strategic risk assessment that looks strategically at the threats, hazards, and risks insofar as they applied to the operational territorial area of responsibility, and then those overlays around, is it rural, urban, combination of both, what does the resourcing look like, and so forth. But coming back to the fundamental point is, yes, that's the holy grail, but that only works if the doctrine is sound, if it's based on correct, accurate, scientifically proven research. Coming back to the point that you raised there, in respect of the different building constructions and so forth, and you're absolutely right. And the example I can use for you is the difference between Australian construction and UK. So the house I live in the UK is a brick-built internal brick partition. Essentially, it's a brick box with little brick boxes inside it. Essentially, that's what it is. Much the same as many other UK houses. So the 1950s, semi-detached property, the same as you'll find in across the UK, built around that era. The house we had in Australia was a single story, brick outer skin, but essentially stud wall, stud partition interior.
Yeah.
Okay, so fundamentally different in that respect, albeit it was still partitioned, it was compartmented in the way in which I've described. It was fundamentally different. Let me tell you where the similarities start, and this is the point of importance in my view. In both properties, they were furnished, the building contents were relatively modern, contemporary. So not legacy building materials, these are modern synthetic-based materials, which have probably 4 times the heat release rate of their legacy alternatives. Now let's hold that thought, because that's important. But still, in my mind, I'm still thinking, if we're looking at the metric of confining fires to room of origin, and I will talk about why I think there are some limitations to that, or at least the way in which that's expressed within the incident recording system. My first thought was, if I analyse the data there, I'm almost certain that they're going to see more fires going beyond the room of origin, because my instinct is thinking, because my brick compartment here is going to contain a fire more so than the stud partition compartment.
Much higher thermal capacity for the boundaries, so it's going to hold it for longer.
All of that. And actually, when you look at the American research, not dissimilar construction actually in some respects to the Australian construction, climatic reasons predominantly. We compare it with the Dutch research, which is much closer to ours, which is why I like to use the two of them as the relative comparisons. Big differences in building construction, similarities in content. And actually, when it comes down to it, you think about any fire investigation you will have done. Much hinges on item first ignited and then orientation of fuel within the compartment as to govern your fire spread. And if we accept that typically a modern, let's say a sofa for a living room fire, or a bed for a mattress then for a bedroom fire, three-piece suite, double mattress, both of which probably capable of generating a 5 megawatt fire, more than enough to transition the compartment to flashover. Absolutely. But what we see is, when you look at the experimentation say either in America or in or the Dutch, you're going to get from ignition, from point of ignition. Of course, this all assumes that that's the item first ignited, or at the very least, the item first ignited then spreads to a higher heat release rate.
Yeah.
Because I've got some stats I can hit you with in a minute, which will back this up. Then, theoretically, at least, but like the archetypical Christmas tree video, you're going to see that room transition to flash over in three or 4 minutes tops.
Yeah.
Other than, of course, the one factor which, based on science, is irrefutable. If you looked at a graph, and actually even in the fires in buildings extant nog, this graph actually exists, and really what I should have done is teed it up so I could load it up now and talk the viewers through it. But essentially, on the left-hand axis, you've got heat release rate. The bottom axis is time. And what you see is, from ignition, very rapid heat release rate. Probably after 2 to 3 minutes, if we had a right-hand axis that showed oxygen concentration, you'd go from 21%, which this is a scientific fact, Pete. I'm sat in the Wirral. You're clearly somewhere else in Northern England. But the oxygen concentration in either room we're sat in is 21%. That is a scientific fact. As it is wherever your viewers are sat, that's just a fact. Because if it isn't, they need to get, because they're in trouble if it is. Their house is on fire and they got a carbon monoxide issue. Put that aside. Right? Whether I'm sat in Australia, America, wherever, that's 21%. Other than when you get that ignition, as the heat release rate goes up, if on the right-hand side of the axis there was oxygen concentration, that starts to go down. And once that hits 16%, it is a scientific fact that combustion can no longer be sustained. The fire goes into decay. That is a fact. And what the Americans have shown is, irrespective of whether that's in an open plan, there may be more available oxygen, but probably even if there is a localized flashover, it still isn't enough to sustain what would then be a full room involvement. Of the ULFSRI on their firefighter safety training portal, where they look at the study where they do the same experiments in a strip mall, so a commercial premise.
Looking at this one here, boss.
So essentially, that's exactly what we're at there. So if you look at
we'll make this document available to people in the links so they can reference what we're talking about.
Yeah, you essentially, if on the right-hand axis it showed oxygen concentration, you would see 21% dropping down to the troughs would be around 16%. And actually what you see is, typically where it starts to rise again is fire and rescue service intervention.
Yes.
And what I can give you here is some acute examples, and I'll do it, Pete. I will do it for a fact. But let me say before I do, in no way is this intended as a criticism of any of the people involved here.
No, of course. We're doing the best with the knowledge that we have. None of this is out of malice or stupidity. It's the way we've been taught.
Indeed, which dates back to 2 surveys from 1994, which I will reference.
In other news, this episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the centre of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. You can view battery life, air pressure and estimated time remaining either independently on the M1 itself or from the Luna connected device screen. Also, still with the air status, alarm information, search status and all of this provided to the incident command for confident decision making during the scene. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. One of the key parts of the Luna is their FAST system, the Firefighting Assisting Search Technology. This combines directional and distance information with thermal imaging to help find separated teammates and decrease response time. It actually connects you to the other crews in the vicinity for a unified search during the time of mutual aid by instantly notifying the network of lunar devices when there is a downed crew member, allowing for a prompt search and rescue. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. It enables you to see the exact location of your firefighters on the scene. And it doesn't require you to be sat on the station. The MSA hub then provides a wireless gateway straight to the cloud, enabling wireless on-scene data for local and remote incident command for additional eyes on the scene. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity. MSA is dedicated to increasing safety in the fire service through technological advancements. Various feature enhancements, new products, partnerships, and integrations will provide additional capabilities readily accessible by products, software, and services in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
Essentially, if you let's take Shirley Towers as an example. So B18 Red 1 go in. As I understand it, Red 2 is tasked as a hose management team going in behind them. So they're going in with what I understand to be a 45mm from what I would guess was a 100mm dry riser. So charged to, you would think, 10 bars. So a line of 45, charged to 10, 9th floor, working out your pressure and flow. I'm guessing, depending on the flow setting on the branch, it would be reasonable to assume you get a flow rate of at least 300 litres a minute out of that, you would think, at least. B18 Red 1 goes in, the flat 9. I assume that the door is left ajar here. But what I think it's fair to say is because they understandably cannot locate the fire in the living room because it's ventilation controlled at that point. So it will be giving off large volumes of smoke. Visibility will be next to zero, all completely understandable. They are unable to locate the fire. They go upstairs then. This is an up flat. So they're going in on floor 9. They then go up to the 10th floor, which is the bedrooms. Again, they cannot locate a fire in any of the bedrooms. And then what happens, it's all a matter of, this is a matter of record. They then open the windows. Because in their minds, they think we're going to ventilate, it will improve the conditions. Yeah. Now go back to the fire which the fire is established beyond reasonable doubt. No one's disputing the fire is in the living room. So on your diagram there, you can see that and they are now up on what is now the 10th floor, because the upper box, that's the fire escape on the 11th floor, which B18 Red 1 gets off. So by opening the windows, what they've then done, assuming we've got the front doors open, they have then introduced oxygen into that fire. They have created a flow path. It is a scientific fact that high pressure goes to low pressure, that hot goes to cold. The hot fire gases from that now rapidly developing fire, which has now got all this additional oxygen, and all of the research shows that a ventilation controlled fire in decay can rapidly transition to flashover conditions, unsurvivable heat flux conditions within a minute, 2 minutes. That is then what is happening. They are in they are the wrong side of they're in the exhaust vent. So B18 Red 1 and Red 2. Red 1 managed to get out of the 11th floor. Red 2 do not. Tragically, firefighters Bannon and Shears, they do not manage to get out. Right? This is a fact. This is not a criticism. That's a fact. What happens thereafter is when it is established that the B18 Red 2 are unaccounted for, and again, this is all there in the report, not me making any of this up. What then happens is subsequent teams go in and they are quoted as pulsing for the best part of 20 minutes and having no effect whatsoever on them what is a post-flashover fire. So that, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in America, Southampton, wherever you are, doesn't really matter that much about the construction. Because unless every door and window is open in that house, that fire is going to become ventilated. Any fire that has the potential to go beyond the room of origin, the reasonable assumption to make is it's going to become ventilation controlled or limited, probably within 2 or 3 minutes. Hence, the Dutch principles, the renewed view of firefighting. First principle, you've got more time than you think. And maybe we come back to some of that. If I can, if you'll indulge me, if I just speak to two sort of fundamentals here, and you referenced them at the beginning, and unfortunately, as yet, they are still not, in my view at least, appropriately addressed within fires and firefighting, which was out for consultation last year. I and others made fairly extensive submissions, evidence-based submissions, and my hope is that they will be taken into account when the final version is published, which will be split into a foundation for firefighting and then the firefighting non-hazard and risk control statements. My hope is then that ambiguity is removed, science-based evidence is in there, and it should begin a shift in thinking. If I can, you just indulge me, just look at two specific issues that to consider here, both of which date back to the research. FRDG report thing 494 and 594, survey of backdraft, survey of ventilation. So we'll look at the survey of backdraft first. It was a guy called Chitty, commissioned by the Home Office Fire Research Development Group, which clearly no longer exists because we don't have anything like that anymore. So Chitty goes over to Sweden to have a look at what was the Mats Rosander Christer Gisselson method, like the system that Rosander and Gisselson had developed. And that system essentially was predicated on yes, very much gas cooling, but you've got to look at the system in a whole. So some fundamentals, it was a 3-person team. Third firefighter, the team leader, responsible for door control, anti-ventilation, closing down the flow path. Clearly you can't shut the door completely because you've got a hose line running through it. The hose line was 38mm, low pressure, high flow. We designed a branch specifically to deliver I think the 0.3 mil droplet, so the optimum pulse droplet size. No problem at all with that. Only ever designed for use in small compartments. And probably the fundamental piece of this is used to progress through the small compartment with door control, thus keeping the fire relatively ventilation controlled and heat release rate relatively low. But once they got in line of sight of that compartment, they switched to straight stream, they put the fire out. That bit, of course, gets lost. The only bit of that finds its way over here is the pulsing bit. Not with 48 mil or 45 or 52 mil. Predominantly with 19 mil hose reels capable of flowing 100 litres a minute at best on a straight stream.
Yep.
So this all gets lost in translation. You then compound that with the TAC vent, and listen, Pete, you could, no one could have been more immersed than me in this stuff. You know, I did my station officer's exam in '97, so I did my LFs, my subs, my stay. Back in the day, we still had the IFE, and of course the first iterations of compartment fires and TAC vent, they'd come out and they actually made their way onto the syllabus. I was all over that stuff. But equally, I knew.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation I'll circle back to in a minute. What's happening with IFE and the foundational knowledge of officers now, especially when we look at things like direct entry and things like that, which is another rabbit hole. Maybe we'll make time for in a bit.
But I come back to this stuff's fundamental. Now, at least, and I'm not saying the exams were imperfect to a point, as were the Fire Service College Foundation, JOA, or Crew Command, Watch Command 1, 2, whatever they call them these days, essentially were based on the manuals. But it was good stuff. It was based on science. It was based on, to be honest, James Braidwood's essays in the 1800s. Braidwood, the fire grows in direct proportion to the oxygen supplied to it. I would tend to be minded to listen to what Braidwood had to say, given the fact that back then they had no BA. They didn't have any pumps in the way or any firefighting media around the way we did. So the sort of stuff they were doing, that was by doing the hard yards and the lived experience. I'd be minded to listen to what the likes of him that he had to say. And of course, our guidances were leading up until we adopt or make a partial adoption at best of Rasander and Gistelson's work, which I've got no problem with, by the way. Absolutely fine, provided you do exactly what it was that they were advocating, which clearly we're not doing. And similarly, we're using demonstration units, as attack boxes, and I'll come on to the fuel loads in a sec, but just turning to the ventilation. Back in the 90s, the Americans vent often, vent early, vent often, okay, which is what they did.
Yeah.
Vertical ventilation predominantly, not horizontal, vertical. So they'd have an engine company, you've got a ladder company. Engine company does the fire attack, ladder company gets up on the roof, opens it up. Okay, get the principle of it. A couple of points to consider. The resource that way, and they're probably getting there quite quickly, and they're getting there together. The other fundamental is in America, much newer country than here, their water main, essentially, the domestic supply is drawn off the fire main. They've probably got 300 mil mains, they're like trunk mains everywhere. We're lucky here, 100 mil main. We're drawing the fire attack off the domestic supply, and you'll have had issues with water. Compound that, we're going in with a 19 mil hose reel capable of flowing 100 litres tops on a straight stream versus the Yanks, 1 3/4 inch smooth bore, with a flowing probably 500 pounds. Very, very different set of circuits. But don't get me wrong, if they're getting it wrong, they're still killing people. So I'm not advocating vertical ventilation, don't get me wrong. I'm with Braidwood. I'm advocating anti-ventilation. I'm advocating shut the windows, shut the door, don't shut it down.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing.
And I think certainly for the contextual understanding for people newer into the fire service, that is the point I would like to highlight and zoom in on. Because of the advances in compartmentation in buildings, there's a much greater argument and understanding for anti-ventilation because the buildings can take it a lot of the time. Places like Grenfell and others, exemptions, because there's only so much we can encompass within this sheep dip analogy. But the principle of anti-ventilation is very sparsely shared, I think.
And that's the point. You touched on it earlier. We have a generation, maybe 2 generations now of supervisory managers through no fault of their own. Probably have nothing like the depth of understanding of fire behaviour. And they're still reliant on, fires and firefighting is the extant version, not helped by the fact you've got fires in buildings which sit separate to it. There are scientific inaccuracies in there, that it is contradictory. It's written with the best of intentions. The people who wrote it based on compartment fires attack vent, which in of itself, attack vent particularly, was advocating American-style ventilation, which at that point had never been scientifically proven, and which, based on the work of Underwriters Laboratory, so ULFSRI, Fire Safety Research Institute, substantially have started to move away from all of that. Now, in my view, NFPA 1700, so the Guide to Structural Firefighting, Chapter 10 in particular, which is essentially the tactical considerations. That is your menu of tactical options, which sets out from, it deals with the water attack through to the air, so water, air, so attack, ventilation or anti-ventilation. That to me is probably the best piece of guidance out there that I am aware of. That, for your control measure tactics, is what I would be directing any policy writer towards. It is evidence-based, it's current, and quite frankly, it's far superior to anything that I've seen. That's where
it's 2021, wasn't it? The most recent version of that.
October 21, I think, Pete. Yeah. Yeah.
Frustrates me they don't make it freely available though, because I've tried. I'm gonna have to buy one. I've tried multiple times to try and find it online. It's freely available, but it's not. But that's okay.
You can log in and register on the NFPA site, but all you can access is sort of a flick page thing. You're right, you can't download it.
It's frustration, and I get it's someone's intellectual property, but when you put these things behind paywalls, this is for the safety of communities and emergency responders. I feel like this stuff should be freely available, but that's just my personal opinion. Of course, I would say that.
Look, I absolutely share that. I mean, the thing in fairness, the ULFSRI Fire Safety Portal, that is freely available, as indeed, if you look at that, for all intents and purposes, is funded by FEMA through the Assistance to Firefighters grants. It's a let me say that there is nothing you could compare that to in the UK, should we say?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a bit of a shame, I think. I'm being very diplomatic there, Pete, but I just feel it's a bit of a shame that the UK Fire and Rescue Service, which was once the envy of the world in terms of its standing, and if you look at the doctrine and such like, that we should fall so far behind. Let me be clear though, that's I think in technical rescue, I think we're really good. Things like UCRO, there's some fantastic stuff getting done there. I think our command and control is really good. I think our BA, particularly the BA, the accountability, so Ops Guidance BA is absolutely first class. When I went over to Australia, the first thing really jumped out at me, the complete absence of anything remotely like Ops Guidance BA. So really from the get go, I was on that. So where is our accountability here? In respect, even something as simple as rapid deployment with the watch officer being the entry control operative. Nothing, complete absence of any of that really in any formalised sense until there was stage 1 and 2, but it didn't kick in anything like the way that we would get to. Another discussion, but the point I'm making is it's not all bad. But I think in respect of doctrine, for the reasons we've discussed, that's where and it is so fundamental to firefighter safety, which surely that's got to be our driving motive. Because if your firefighters aren't safe, I mean, what sort of service can you be reassured you're delivering to the public if you can't be sure that your doctrine is such that your firefighters are safe?
Looking back for a second, because it's something we haven't mentioned yet, but if we just go here for a second, in comparison to the years you served in the military, the doctrine, the high regard for agreed and followed standard practices, military guidance, what was the shift like for you when moving? And this is not to say one is better than the other as such; they're very different things. How did you square that circle when you saw the changes going on in the fire and rescue services and the sheer diversity of implementation of what should be agreed principles sort of nationally?
I mean, you make an excellent point. The UK military doctrine is produced centrally and it is adopted irrespective of your cap badge, irrespective of whether you're, like I was in the parachute regiment, or if you're in the Royal Marines, or the RAF regiment, whatever it may be. Fundamentally, your doctrine is the same. Your military your section battle drills are the same. There is one way of doing it. It's the right way. When I first joined, there was a degree of standardisation which I think was brought together and consolidated through central training at the Fire Service College. But of course, that was all. There is a view there to say
that got scattered to the wind, didn't it? When services started training themselves, when funding was reinterpreted, redistributed. I wonder if that was. We had Dominic Wellman on not so long ago, and again, obviously, he wasn't present at the time, but he's currently managing director of the college, and he was able to pinpoint some of the connective, contributing factors to how things got so disparate. And everyone, not self-deployed, is probably very offensive because these are all subject matter experts just at different parts of the UK. But it did seem like some fell far behind, some continued to surge ahead, but everybody got into siloed working before people started coming together for things like NOG.
Look, there was a dismantling of all of the fire and rescue service infrastructure, from JCDD, the exams, everything. The argument with the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, and everything then devolved to the sector, but without necessarily the resourcing to support that, and then you're down to well-meaning people essentially trying to do stuff in the dinner hour,
Yeah.
So fast forward to
Mate, that's the narrative of most training departments still in the UK now. It's they're so busy just trying to deliver. You're so busy working in the thing, you never get to work on the thing. So you're teaching stuff still that you're like, this isn't right, and this isn't like what I've been reading up online, and this is nothing to do with, or it's very different from what I've learned on the Lacent, professional development course that I went in wherever. But there's there's very little available national training resource for people to be able to bring themselves back into line, or even bring their services training up to current standards that are scientifically based. Today's podcast is powered by our partner Lifelines and their revolutionary approach to functional hydration. Just like in firefighting, water is essential for body function, but studies show more than 80% of firefighters are dehydrated. A 25-year study findings from the National Institute of Health showed poor hydration to be linked to early aging and chronic disease, and even mild dehydration results in significant negative impact outcomes, including headaches, exhaustion, rapid pulse, irritability, and poor cognitive function. A study conducted by Yale University showed that participants who were just 1% dehydrated had a 12% increase in errors when performing tasks that required cognitive flexibility. In addition, dehydration is shown to worsen mood and attitude, contribute to confusion and poor decision making, and negatively affect memory and judgment. In other words, you really don't want your incident commander, firefighter, or for that matter any first responder on a critical scene to be even slightly dehydrated. Mild dehydration occurs when a person is just 1.5% dehydrated, a condition that does not even trigger the thirst response in most people. So just imagine how quickly a firefighter or any first responder can and does become dehydrated in their day-to-day duties, which is why I address my hydration first thing every day with Lifelines. Go into the notes for this episode and specifically check out Lifelines Hydro Fuel and Hydro OG by clicking in the notes for the podcast for a clean energy solution designed for those who demand more from their day. Now back to the show.
And look, I go back to, as the chair of the Operations Coordination Committee, as was back then, I often would use the analogy, this is like trying to juggle chickens, getting consensus. Back then there was 45 services in England, 3 in Wales, 1 in Scotland, 1 in Northern Ireland, plus the Crown dependencies. So there's over 50 fire and rescue services, you've got 50 individual chief officers.
Yeah.
Believe me, Pete, it was a bit of a challenge to try and get any sort
of herding cats.
As I say, juggling chickens was my. Now, you go back to what you've just described there, and I have made recommendations to this effect when having undertaken inspections within Wales in my current role around consistent standardised doctrine, operational risk assessment, control measure knowledge, control measure tactics, menu of tactical options, each of which then, if it doesn't already have a standard practice or a technique as contained within the Fire and Rescue Service Training and Development Manual, then the service, and in Wales there's some excellent examples there of individual training packages, we call them micro teachers, which essentially is the sort of thing you could search up on YouTube. It is a best practice demonstration, EDIP, explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice, best practice demonstration filmed on YouTube type sort of package, which is then available. And my argument being, yes, there should be the operational risk assessment, which all of these control measure tactics would be then articulated because they are your fundamental control measures. But each one of them must have its own training package, which has the underpinning knowledge, the hazard knowledge, which you can do through like a Learn Pro type platform. But then conversely, there has to be the practical application of that can be done on a fire station with limited training resource. Because, of course, you will know as well as I do, you're from a training background, but not every watch manager is. You are a hostage to fortune as a chief officer as to the levels of skill of your, and this is not a criticism, that you would have on any given day in Merseyside. I'd have 26, probably have 26, 27 individual crew, whatever we had, depending on how many pumps were available, all of whom might be tasked with delivering training on that day, on station training, and you get 28, 29 different versions of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Which is why one of the things we did there, that produced something called the safe person assessment for every single bit of kit on the fire engine and every single control measure tactic. Don't get me wrong, Pete, it was very rudimentary, but it was something. It was standardised, and it gave a resource to watch managers to take off the shelf, and within the structured programme, that is a resource then that they can rely on step by step. That's the standardised way. That's the right way to do it. That's what good looks like. And of course, if you're a station manager looking to do the ops assurance on that, then you then have something standardised to, right, that's what they should be doing in respect of learning outcomes and so forth. So much better if that's done on a YouTube platform, because you can physically watch them doing it. Instructors like yourself would be demonstrating the technique, and then you go out in the yard and do it. And that, but it's exactly what you're saying. This requires investment. It requires time and effort.
That's the thing with having everyone trying to do their own thing. You'll know far, far better than me the financial challenges fire and rescue services are facing. Everyone just got a pay rise, which is fantastic, but over 80% of fire and rescue services funding now is committed solely to paying the boys and girls that work within those organizations. So training departments seem to be shrinking more and more, which echoes back to this, looking for regional resources, services joining together, the re-emergence and rise of the college as an example for a centre of learning excellence. We do need to lean in and work together more to address these challenges.
Of that, there is no doubt, Pete. And you through my whole tenure as chief officer in Merseyside, I in every single year dealt with. It's not. This is just a fact. These are not. These are statements of fact. Our budget was substantially reduced. The revenue support grant was substantially reduced, and we were limited to what we could raise on the council tax precept, which meant that every single year we had a big deficit. And it is challenging in the extreme to think that you can, at best, probably maintain rather than look to seek to improve your performance, which the public rightly expect that that's what we should be doing. And indeed, our staff, they rightly deserve that their service should be invested in. And
it's a big service as well, Merseyside. 23, I think they've got 24 stations left now.
It used to be, Pete. It's probably half the size it was when unfortunately I had to oversee we had to lose. It was around 5.
Horrible time, mate. That's one of those things I'd love to actually zoom in on, because people forget with chief fire officers, there is no easy solution. There's no solutions at all. There's only trade-offs. And you can't operate like you would with a business, where you would budget for something for next year and go over budget because you can see retirements or you can see a change of the wind. You have very stringent legislative framework, and also ramifications, including legal ramifications and imprisonments if you do not responsibly manage the funding of that service.
No, indeed. And look, let me be clear. It is entirely right and proper that you are held to account. That's right. Look, if you look at the narrative and it must have been the integrated risk management plan of 2016, which is we were some way into austerity then, and that's when we were having to start to make some of the real. We'd gone well beyond the point of. There was certainly no low-hanging fruit, and we'd gone well beyond the point now where it wasn't going to have a.
You trimmed all the fat by that point, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And and we'd taken other measures to improve productivity. So, for example, not particularly popular things, Pete, I grant you, but things like shift equalisations instead of 9:15, 12:12 to maximise training time, SSRI, risk reduction work and such like. I won't get into that, but we'd taken all of the measures that we could to ensure that we absolutely maximised the capacity that we had to ensure that the highest levels of training were getting undertaken and that community risk management work and so forth. But ultimately, I made the point in the narrative of in the introduction to the 2016 Integrated Risk Management Plan, said I need to make a point here that in respect, say, where we've looked and we've set a 10-minute response standard, I said, let me be absolutely clear to everyone for the avoidance of doubt. That has got nothing to do with integrated risk management planning and everything to do with AA Route Finder. That is simply where we are positioning stations on the strategic network.
Yeah.
Because we know if we drop down to 10, we can cover all the Merseyside in 10 minutes from a standing start on 90% of occasions.
Non-negotiables based on fact,
Yeah, and again, the point being is, but it has nothing to do with risk. It's got everything to do with, if I've got a set of response standard, then it's as much about giving the mobilising officer and fire control some very clear parameters around what stations do you cover when the number of pumps drops below, because it's reasonably foreseeable that they're going to. So what is your guidance, what you cover to ensure that most equitable maintenance of response once you are exposed to the day-to-day realities of responding to incidents, and the volume that comes with that.
You mentioned before we came on today, and it's an interesting subject maybe to talk about now, some of your most enjoyable times in the fire and rescue service were your rider station officer days, your firefighter days, which is wonderful. And it's not to say you didn't take value from and add value in the other roles that you later pursued. But talking about the conversation that we're having there around the difficulties that chief fire officers and senior leadership are facing, when I look at things like the NFCC website, I see a lack of hunger and interest in some of these more senior positions. And please tell me again if I'm wrong there and you're seeing a different side to the coin. I worry about top talent not wanting to or not being attracted to the sector for those more senior positions because of the inherent challenges that these individuals are facing at those senior levels. And even for yourself, as you reflect back, it's very difficult to exist at that level. How did you manage it personally, cognitively, the pressures and day-to-day life of those levels beyond, rider station officer that you then pursued?
What I would say is, and you touched on this before with your reference to probably the way people working within training departments feel. What I did feel like I was constantly firefighting, pun intended. Whereas, do you know the irony is now having had the opportunity to be in the role that I'm in currently as a HMI, and having that time to step out, to reflect, to read more, I would be, and clearly I suppose as you get older, you mature, don't you, as well, I guess.
That's the theory. I'm waiting for that to kick in.
Theoretically, at least, I'm not sure I could claim that myself, but there you go. But anyway, I actually do believe I would make a far better chief officer now than then, because I got all the benefit of that experience.
You can unplug from the I don't need to panic about this right now. There's bigger things at play. Some things will actually resolve themselves without me panicking them for 2 or 5 days. And it'd be far more beneficial for me to take this next 3 hours to fully get elbow deep and immerse myself in some of the guidance, some of what other services are doing, what the NHS, what the police are doing. It would allow for more cognitive bandwidth to probably make better decisions in reflection.
Look, undoubtedly, Pete, undoubtedly. Driving into work of a morning, firstly, I would always just look at my rank markings and think, you are minding this. It's not about you. It's it is a huge, huge privilege to be in this role, to serve, and I just got to do my very best to live up to that, because of the fantastic people that we work with, and those people that we serve. So, sort of guiding principle stuff. It was full on, Pete. It was full on. It wasn't particularly family friendly. I think the only reason, probably in a personal sense, that my wife, she's retired now, but she was a watch manager in the USAR team, dog handler. So she was on call as well. She understood, I guess, a lot of that, and I think that's probably why we probably got through it, because we both understood.
Yeah.
Whether that would have been the case if it were not so, who knows? But look, I recognise, and it may not be any different now. We were struggling in Merseyside. We were really struggling to get people to step up from firefighter to crew manager, watch manager. And I get that. Yeah. I understand people. Why would we want to take that extra responsibility on? I get that. I can remember.
Well, why though? Because you did, and many do. So just expand there for a second. What is it? Is it the desire that I'm always one of those? I'm not going to throw stones unless I'm willing not to get on the field and do it myself.
Look, some of the reasons that were articulated to me, for all the extra responsibility, you're held to account, and why should I do that? It's hardly any extra money, and they were the sort of things. And look, what I would always say is look, when have I, as the chief, when have I ever not stood and backed you all? When have I ever not done that? Because let's be clear, this is me speaking to, and I every single day, Pete, I'd get out and station. I would get out and station. I detested being stuck in headquarters. I would get out and station. I'd train with the crews. I was probably, I'm not saying this is what you should. I'd drill with them. I'd throw ladders up with them. I'd rock up to jobs far more than I ever should, than there would be an argument I ever should have done. I would take charge of more jobs, arguably, than I should have done. But I loved it, you know what I mean? And actually, that's where you see the ground truth. That's where you see reality. That's where it's hang on. When you start lifting the stones.
That's a good point that you say there, like, impact intended versus impact felt. The path of travel of intention, policy, ideas between chief fire officer and firefighter, there's a lot of messy middle to lose the ground truth between that. So if you don't get an opportunity to be in front of those individuals, what you intended to happen when you had that conversation with your area managers, group managers, whoever, 6 weeks ago, versus what is actually manifesting after the Chinese whispers and the misinterpretations.
Completely. But within, absolutely right, but within that, of course, there is the dichotomy where, as the chief, the hardest thing, I can only speak for myself, others probably would have another view. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing I always thought was not doing what I wanted to do. Not doing what, because I could. Theoretically, you can't. You're the chief, do whatever you like. It's not strictly true, of course. You can't. You've got to act responsibly all the time, so far. But and I'd experienced, that like long screwdriver people, that micromanagement thing, and that just, in my opinion, experience just switches people off.
Long screwdriver. I've never heard it described as that before. That's fantastic.
Yeah, the long screwdriver.
That reaching down and micromanaging. That's a great articulation of it. I've not heard that one before. And
the other one for you is like the pond weed just strangles the life out of people. It's just So what I would do with my colleagues, my leadership team colleagues, right, we will agree the strategic vision. We would be lined up behind this safe, effective firefighting. It was all about ops. Public expectation, we will be a good fire and rescue service. Let's be clear, the public don't really know what good looks like in many respects. Yeah. We do, and we need to live up to that. That's what we're about. Safe, effective firefighters. That's how we deliver. That's how we deliver good. You know what I mean? Not into badge collecting, not into any of that. We put the hard yards in. We're all well paid. We earn our money. We do the right thing. That's a values thing. And I would set, that's the vision. You go and deliver that. That's the effect. To use the military-based analogy, what is the effect we are trying to achieve? Right, we all agree that's the effect. Right, you go do that. it's not for me to tell you the journey, but that is the destination. Of course, that would frustrate the life out of me, because then that's how I'd do it. Like, back, just because that's how I'd do it, let them get on and do it. But then it does
Yeah.
in that thing around. Do you see what I mean? You can run a dictatorship, but here's the thing, Pete. I used to say, and I would always say to them, look, if you think that I'm no, you choose my language carefully. If you think I am talking rubbish, then I want you to challenge me. I want you to tell me, but I want you to tell me why, and I want you to tell me what we do instead.
Mate, this is one of my biggest frustrations and challenges. So I'm one, and the podcast is an example of it. Strong believes weakly held is a saying I really enjoy, because I'm very passionate about the things I say. But if you can, through science, evidence, demonstrate to me why what I'm saying is bollocks, then I am happy to onboard your opinion and to drive with it. And I'll put some horsepower behind your belief. I'll open some doors. I'll kick down some doors if I need to. But you are a little bit like me. You're a white British male. You seem like you're a big fella who possibly exercises. I have honestly come up against some difficulties. And again, it's probably the intention I've tried to get across when I'm communicating versus perhaps what's felt. When I get very passionate about things, and you sound like you're a passionate individual yourself, how have you balanced that? Because you said there, please, if you think I'm talking rubbish, push back against me, challenge me. A lot of people don't like difficult conversations. They don't know the difference between an argument and a debate. I think debates are very good. They're very healthy. They're very necessary at leadership levels. Even at crew manager, watch manager, you need to be able to debate and have healthy discussion around the intention and what is agreeable, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what are we about. You're an ex-para. You're a very disciplined man. How have you balanced that? Because I think our aversion to discipline is a real issue with the degradation of standards, training, and. But it's very hard to differentiate the two when people just see it sometimes as hostile, as overbearing, as, you know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you mean, Pete. I know exactly what you mean.
We're not the military, is what I get told. And we're not. You're right.
No, and I can recall, there was always this militaristic being bandied around as if it was a bad thing. The UK military is outstanding. It's our greatest export by a country mile. We should strive to be like the UK. But it's people using the term militaristic who have no understanding whatsoever what the military is all about. No, I was in the parachute regiment, controlled aggression. Highly aggressive, highly, you have to be lightly armed. You can only carry what you can parachute in with. You got to be fit, you got to be robust, you got to be tough. You're operating in really austere, difficult. I joined not long after the Falklands. All of my directing staff were Falklands vets. They were not. It was brutal, Pete. They were not going to accept anything other than the absolute highest standard to go up to the battalions, and why should they? Rightly so. Now, look, the Fire and Rescue Service is not in the same space as that. I accept that. But there is a requirement for standards.
I think it's harder for us to articulate success, as I think is what the problem is there, sorry. Like with military, there's a very clear success, whereas with us, I've never been to a fire that's still burning now. Eventually, they all go out, even if you're a really shit firefighter.
Ironically, Pete, going back to my earlier point, they'll go out whether you do something or you don't. You know what I mean? Because either the fuel will get consumed or the oxygen will get the best. But yeah, take the point. Look, it is fundamentally important here that we must treat people with you in the workplace. It is a place of work, and your behaviour in that place of work, you must be respectful to your colleagues. You don't have to like them, but you absolutely should be respectful to them. And that extends to if someone has a view, if someone has an opinion, they have the right to have that opinion to be heard. What I did, and look, I know what you're saying, Pete. You're big lad, you intimidate people. They don't want to. I would.
But that's not the intention.
Absolutely.
It's just I get very excited and passionate.
Look, absolutely, and I understand that for the same reasons. I occupy the same
I'm
space.
probably asking for some private coaching here. I'm like, help me. How did you achieve that and get people on board without doing the
Firstly,
damage?
you would need to ask other people if I did achieve it. It wouldn't be for me to say that. But what I would do, always, firstly, what I would do, I would set something out, right? This is the articulate, this is the issue, discuss. And I would step back and I would deliberately not speak until the end.
Okay.
Difficult to do because I want to get it.
I find it hard even with the podcast. I keep interrupting because I get too excited.
Look, and that's all good. And that enthusiasm and passion should never be stifled. But I'm saying in the strategic context, strategic leadership team, I would try, whether I was always successful again, others would take a view. Right, there's the issue, discuss, and I would let them speak. And very quickly, my colleagues stepped up because they're all highly talented people, fantastic people. Very quickly step up. And I'm like, okay, this is good. Exactly, you put this is good, healthy debate. We don't all have to agree. We don't all have to like each other. That's sound. But we will respect each other and we will treat each other respectfully. And we will respect each other's views, whether we agree with them or we don't, unless they're completely outrageous, and clearly, if somebody's saying something highly offensive, then absolutely that gets called out. There is no question about that. But it's that, for me, these are just.
Isn't that a bit of a false economy, though? And what I'm about to try to say there is, in higher levels of services, people are already conditioned to an extent to act very professionally. They do need to get shit done. They have to actually have delivered some value, otherwise they wouldn't be sat where they are. A lot of the cultural issues that we see emerging, I feel personally, across the UK fire and rescue services, are at the lower levels where it's perhaps more difficult to challenge. People are given a much wider bandwidth of a lot of deadwood on watches, a lot of people that have low standards, poor firefighting, and because at your level, it's like you know people are marching to the beat of a different drum already.
Understand the point you make completely, Pete. And let me be clear. Given the unique intimacy of the fire and rescue service environment on the watch, I did 15 years on the trucks, Pete, so I get it. I know what you mean.
I know.
And I was a firefighter for 6-7 years before becoming LF. So I was at a reasonable time as a firefighter. Now, you're right. People don't like confrontation. Don't like saying no. I'll be honest with you. As a watch officer, I was always of the view. I'm not here to win popularity contests. I'm here to do a job. And I can remember. I won't name the watch, but first as a rider station officer, first night was a Saturday night. First night on there with that particular watch, 1800 parade, all good. Like detail everyone off. 1830, all hands fire cut. You can imagine drill Saturday night. We don't drill. You do. All hands fire cut. Right, we're getting out in the train. We did, and there was a load of chunnering, Pete. They weren't happy about it. Load of chunnering. We got out, we trained, and I'll be honest with you, they weren't that good. They weren't doing any training, you know what I mean, which is hardly surprising. And,
I've been there.
And so it went on, and on days, drill all morning, SSRI, and all afternoon, we'd be out, be busy. Devil makes work for idle hands, Pete. You'll know that yourself, you know what I mean? No such thing as a bad watch, only a bad watch manager. We grafted hard, you know what I mean, and we trained.
But I think with a purpose and a mission, that's what keeps people in line as well. That's what keeps people with a sense of purpose. Like you said, the devil makes work for idle hands. It's like if you give them lots of time, they will start bickering. They will start twatting about. They will start stealing things, making mistakes, being mischievous.
And behaving inappropriately towards each other and everything, all the other appalling things that have got no place in any organisation, let alone the fire and rescue service. No, I think for me, the point I make, we had this particular watch. We had a job, Liverpool City Centre. It was a line rescue, not a technical rescue. We're first in attendance, so this is the days before we had the technical rescue teams. And we put together a line system. We effect a complicated line rescue, and we get this guy's getting chased by the police, jumps over a set of railings and falls whatever 20 odd feet down into a basement. So we fully seriously, and
Nice.
the paramedics, we're going to get him out. So leave it with us. Set a line system up, lower a firefighter down, get him packaged, haul them out, all good. Relatively straightforward in truth. We got a big crowd around us, and they're all like, "Oh, that was impressive." And you see the crew, on the pub driving back to station.
Yeah.
Like, that was good. And I just turned around, I'm like, was it Jack Nicklaus that said, the more I practice, the luckier we get?
Yes.
And it's
100%, mate.
The more we
100%.
practice, the luckier we get.
And I always say this is my thing with the fire service, because actually, with the military, with the greatest respect, I think the percentages are very small. It's something like 20%, if not less, of the military ever deploy into a conflict zone and will actually ever do the thing they're trained to do.
Absolutely.
Yet they train so much more passionately and so much more diligently sometimes than we ever do. But if you're a firefighter, there's a high likelihood you are going to do the thing.
Absolutely, Pete. I joined after the Falklands and I left before Afghanistan. But almost the whole time I was in, we were UK Lead Parachute Battalion Group. So it was 5 Airborne Brigade back in the day, probably 16 Air Assault now. And my abiding memory is not, look, your memory plays tricks. It was a long time. It was over 30 years ago now. But we were training and exercising constantly. We were out in the field. We were soldiering, and we were at such a high level of readiness, and that stayed with me. That has stayed with me. And because I knew, I had absolute confidence that if we were to deploy, I had absolute confidence. From O Group and Aldershot, off to South Cerney, the Air Mountain Centre, from there, RAF Lynham, 4 or 5 hours, horrific low-level flying on the Hercules with the RAF SF pilots, everyone being stuck on each other. You'd parachute in, you'd probably do a 50-odd mile advance to contact, because it was all based on like the Falklands and the long tab across the Falklands, carry an outrageous amounts of kit, all the rest of it. Live battalion attack, and then dig in. Horrific. And then do it all again. You know what I mean? Otterburn, Salisbury Plain, Brecon, you name it. We're all over the world doing that. Yeah. Fantastic. But you know what? I come back to, the more we practice, the luckier we get. Now, I am not advocating going to those extremes. What I am advocating is, in line with HSG 65, Guide to Successful Health and Safety Management policy, organisational arrangements to deliver the policy, strategic planning and implement, monitor, audit, review. It's not hard. It's a fire rescue service. It's not difficult, Pete. Yes, we had some difficult financial challenges.
We're not curing cancer here, folks. You know what I mean? This is stuff that you haven't got to reinvent the wheel.
You've got it, mate. It is a very, very narrow, compared to, say, a local authority, which would deal with anything from adult social care, children's services.
Lots of complexity and quagmire there.
Absolutely. We are dealing with structured fires, technical rescue, hazmat, any other humanitarian special service. It's all reasonably foreseeable. There's a load of hazard knowledge. There's a load of control measure knowledge. We can trade. The one commodity we've got in abundance, particularly with whole-time firefighters, complete opposite for the RDS, clearly, time. We've got time in abundance. Let's use that time. Let's train. With the greatest of respect, sleeping for half your shift doesn't make you safer. It doesn't make the public safer. I won't get into that, but you know what I'm saying. Training, exercising. Because in the absence of the real thing, it's the next best thing. Right? And we are only as good as the next job we go to. And let me tell you, Pete, some of the research that I've done, what it shows is, in any 100 structure fires, typically, this is based on the research I've done, 60 of them are going to be no firefighting action. Right?
Okay.
No firefighting action. Pan of food out on arrival. That sort of thing. Overheated light fit.
Yeah.
The remaining 40, 25 of them remain in the room of origin. Bear in mind, the incident recording system is extremely limited, actually, in the way in which this information is captured. It gives you.
I did note that earlier when you said about the limitations of IRS. Just to expand on that for people perhaps earlier in their careers that perhaps aren't adopting a junior officer or LF position. Just expand on what IRS is and how we record this data.
So the incident recording system essentially records the details of every single incident that the fire and rescue service attends. So what it doesn't do, it won't record, a log won't get created if your appliance is turned back en route, for example. But essentially for everything that we attend, there is a record, and it's for statistical analysis purposes. But if we deal in the fire space, this is my starting point for this data. So every 100 structure fires, dwelling fires I'm dealing with now, to be clear. So not all structure fires, this is dwelling fires. So FSEC code 01020708, that within that group. So essentially structures within which people live, okay, which is the biggest volume number anyway in that data set. So 60 of the 100, so 60%, I'm rounding up slightly, but indulge me, no firefighting action. The remaining 40, 25 remain within the room of origin, which means in all likelihood they're more likely to be fuel controlled, i.e. whatever we did, they were never getting beyond the room of origin. It's the remaining 15 that go beyond the room of origin. So 15 out of every 100 that are recorded proper, you'd argue proper, like not the 40 are going to be working jobs, but your 15 are the ones where potential for some significant damage to someone's house.
Yeah.
Irrespective of what the IRS might suggest, because there is a field there that 8.20, I think it is, status of fire on arrival. And more often than not, with these 15, the person filling it out said the fire was beyond the room of origin. What it actually says is fire or heat damage beyond the room of origin. And what I would say is, put aside the fact that you're asking turkeys to vote for Christmas with that one. Because
yes,
in the room of, and it spread after we got there. Like, put that aside. My argument would be to say, unless it's coming out of every door and window, which we've already established, very unlikely to be, because people in the UK tend not to have every door and window open, and therefore if it isn't, then back to the Dutch thing, it's more likely to be ventilation controlled or limited, or the Yank research and so forth. So it's going to be heavily smoke logged. The first thing I'd say is, well, how did you know? How did you know it was beyond the room of origin? How could you tell?
Yeah.
Did you thermal scan? Might have done, but maybe they didn't. This is where some of you, fundamentally, to be a good watch officer, you need to know your stuff. First thing I'd be expecting 360 thermal scan. People, some services are doing it. Establish, have you got? Can we establish what is the room compartment of origin? Because you know what, if you invest a little bit of time at the beginning, you may well be able to establish that simply by observation. You even take your glove off, feeling the glass, basic things like that. Looking through the letterbox, that sort of stuff. Just take a little bit of time. But whatever, we'll go back to the research. It isn't going to come as a great surprise to you, this, Pete, that pretty much almost on every single one of the 15, almost every single one of them, the first informative message, when they actually send one in any reasonable good period of time, 2BA hose reel.
Yep.
Now, the first question...
That's the script.
So the first question I'm then asking is, okay, to that OIC, rhetorically, because clearly I can't interview the OIC, although that would be the obvious follow-up thing to do, would be to say to them, okay, on the IRS, you've said that fire is beyond the room of origin when you get there, or there's fire and heat damage beyond the room of origin, which would strongly suggest to me that is a post-flashover fire. So can you tell me how you thought you were ever going to suppress that with with a 19 mil reel flowing 100 litres a minute? That's the first question I'd be asking. Because the answer to that is you can't. You don't have the flow rate. You do not have the flow rate. Now, people like Paul Grimwood, absolute solid citizen, top quality guy, Euro firefighter, really, really good, publicly available. There's no restrictions on downloading it. Paul's research in respect of optimum or tactical flow rates, they're in NOG. surface area times 5, real simplistic fireground calcs. If that's a post-flash over fire, why isn't you? What prospect do you think you've got of suppressing that with hose reel? You ain't going to do it. Straight away. That's what I'm saying is, Pete, what I think I can demonstrate is we're actually making it worse after we get there. Now, Paul, the LFB did some research about this a while ago, broadly suggesting a similar thing. So why is that? Well, because for all of the reasons we talked about earlier, is by making an entry, you create the flow.
You're immediately interrupting the compartmentation, and you're feeding that fire without the facility to extinguish it.
And if you don't immediately hit it hard, which pulsing with the best will in the world is not.
If you're going to go through, make slow progress, and just pulse as you go whilst it's feeding that fire.
Exactly. Now, the Dutch did a piece of research. If you think the Dutch 4-quadrant model that they introduced after the Egypt Pond fire in 2008, where the 3 firefighters were killed in the boatyard, essentially the 4 quadrants: defensive exterior, offensive exterior, defensive interior, offensive interior. And the rationale being, offensive interior is the very last thing you do. And you'll only do it if there are persons reports. You'll only do it if you've got no other option. But what they looked at is the piece of research they did. And the Americans have got some excellent case studies on this on the ULFSLI website, where on every single occasion, an exterior attack, whether you used a hose reel, main branch, or CAFs, achieved a much more rapid knockdown than the interior attack. Because it's quicker. It would do. I know it's counterintuitive. I'll be honest with you, Pete. It's what we always used to, back in the early 90s, rocking up at one of the unoccupieds that we would get on probably 4 or 5 times a night, some nights, not every night, but in Kirby. In the tenements, where it would rock up and say, me 45mm flight length on the back of the pump locker, AWG smoothbore, whack it off, fire it up hit it externally initially, knock off, get into the doorway, fire the straight stream up into the ceiling, which of course was hitting the hot gases. We didn't particularly know that back then because the science wasn't there. But that's what we did anyway, and then you'd progress in and you'd hit the fire as soon as you could. And we put it out. Great Dutch quote, from Ricky Weaver, the renewed view of firefighting. The best form of gas cooling is to put the fire out.
Have you heard the combine harvester analogy?
I've not. I may have done, but please enlighten me.
It's and I suppose it relates partially to casualty-centered rescue. But if there's a child stuck in the field, and there's a combine harvester running and you're looking for the child, is the best thing to split up and everyone go looking for the child, or is the best thing to go and switch off the combine harvester? When you're gas cooling, pissing about, searching, saying that you're looking for life or just put the fucking fire out. If you focus on switching off the source of all of this, then any other actions, versus staying in there, boundary cooling, gas cooling, blah, blah, blah. I think that's a training scar from gas rigs as well. And also some CFBT as well, where they don't want you to extinguish the fire because people have to reload the box and mess about for the next run. And that's a training scar that people pick up.
Let's explore that in a bit more detail, Peter, if we can. But before we do that, so NFPA 1700, whilst saving life will always be the overriding strategic consideration, extinguishing the fire has to be your first tactical objective. And in the hierarchy of hazard and risk control, that's right at the top of the hierarchy. Eliminate the hazard.
I always say the clue's in the name: fire and rescue.
There you go.
Fire first.
Take that out. And absolutely, even if it is something as simple as just shutting the door on the fire compartment.
Yeah.
Even if it's only isolation, if you can't eliminate. 100%. Going back to the point you make around the training. So if you look at, we've already established that we only take a very small component of Rasander and Giselson's technique, the pulsing bit, okay? Mm-hmm. If we look at, I can't speak for everywhere, but I know that there is a number of services are still using a very rudimentary demonstration unit for their CFBT. which essentially is a single-story ISO container, unlike, say, the Americans or the Swedish versions now, which are two-story, where the fire box is elevated from the observation box. It is a double. It is two distinctly separate things. There's baffles all the way along, still a vertical vent on the roof, but fundamentally, we're in one long ISO container where you have a combination of pallets, MDF, oriented strand board, plyboard, whatever it is. But essentially, you've got a fire load that is fixed, probably deliver about a 1 megawatt heat release rate. You've got an optimal ventilation profile in so much as there's a vertical vent on the roof, but essentially it is a bidirectional flow because both doors are open. So you've got the inlet vent coming in at the bottom, outlet vent at the top. The firefighters then are in relatively cool air, and you pulse away to your heart's content. Heart's content, because the fact is there is almost zero prospect you are ever going to turn out to that. And we've probably got a couple of generations now of CFBTIs and therefore firefighters who are experts in that particular type of fire. But here's the thing, you ain't never going to go to that. Or it's a kitchen fire with the front door open, with direct line of sight on the kitchen, is probably the closest you're ever going to get to that. Yeah.
I think, so having been to a number of facilities across the UK that use that setup, I think the excuse around that is it allows people to see, from incipient to fire growth to closing the box down to decay to different vents. They show the dropping in the layer. But you're right, in terms of the effect on you as a person in that compartment and how you would strategically tackle that fire, it's not really a very useful model because you don't get the feedback. It's a steel box. So again, the boundary acts very differently than premises in the UK would. A few places have got good ones though. I mean, West Mids have got, I think it's at Albury, is it? I think they've got a couple of good units there. They've got a good CFBT setup and instructors, and I think they've got like a high-rise setup with their containers. I think they've got like 9 containers high or something. But anyway, you're right. The standard setup that's sold, and I forget who sells it. It doesn't matter, actually. I won't name the company, but there's one company in the UK that sells these CFBT boxes with the baffles and the vertical vents, and that tends to be the model that a lot of people get, isn't it?
Which is a very rudimentary demonstration unit. It's not an attack unit. And that's the point. It's getting used for attack, and it's simply not that. And the demonstration units have evolved substantially. But I come back to it's the fuel load. That may be representative of a kitchen fire, but it's certainly not representative of a post flashover bedroom fire, which could be up to 15 megawatts. So probably 5 to 15 times the amount, and the heat flux. You just are not going to get anywhere near that. Nowhere near. No. The only way that's getting put out is with a straight stream on a main branch. You've got to go hard, and my view would be hit it from outside first, and then transition to your interior attack, flow and move, which again counterintuitive, but I've had that on station visits where. Yeah, but we've only got 1,800 litres in the tank. I'm like, just use it to put the fire out. And what I mean by that is exterior attack initially, right? Flow for 30 seconds, straight stream through a window. If you're able to, straight stream, steep angle, and train minimal oxygen, water map. So you fire the straight stream at the ceiling, lit the ceiling, it'll spread out down the walls, maximum heat absorption. 30 seconds, you're probably throwing, I don't know, let's say we use 52 mil low pressure, high flow system in Merseyside. So the 52 mil was based on. There's
not many 45s left. I think most are 52 now.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? I mean, BDAG's been around long enough now. So 52 mil low pressure, high flow, flow meters on the pumps, 450 litres a minute. So let's say you're flowing 30 seconds, exterior attack, flowing 200 litres. Immediately transition to your interior attack. You're going in. Absolutely, we're going in. Flow and move, right? straight stream, flow and move, O pattern, or whatever, depending on your vent profile, or just a straight stream. Flowing for, say, I don't know, another 30 seconds, another minute then, let's say, another 400 litres. That fire is out. That's that will suppress a post-flash over compartment fire. The Yanks show it time and time again, with the ULFSLI stuff. 600 litres, okay? You've actually, I can show you examples from incident logs where they've gone in, they've been pulsing away merrily. The thing's getting away from them. It goes from either ground to first, or from first floor bedroom to the roof. And what did he end up doing? Getting an aerial out, flooding the thing down and they're worried about water damage. I'm like, do me a favour, just put the fire out. Put the fire out. 600, let's say, and that's the scenario I described, flow 600 litres, you still got 1,200 in the tank.
And to be fair, if it is a reported, confirmed property fire, you're going to get more than one truck anyway. You get a minimum of 3, even pretty much every service across the UK.
But even if there's a substantial delay, and let's say in the worst case scenario, you'd say, look, you got a crew of 4. And let me be clear,
on call, middle of nowhere.
I'm not advocating. We would always aim to ride 5 at Merseyside. That extra person, huge value, huge added value. Let's say 4. I'm not even going to entertain 3. Not even getting into that. But 4 riders, absolute minimum. OIC, entry control operative, rapid deployment. But step through sequentially. The operational risk assessment should assume this. It should anticipate this. And there's some clear task, analysis there. The OIC doing the 360. The pump operator engaging the pump. BA wearers donning, not starting at this point. Let's assume they're going to don because of the real good stuff around contamination. They ain't got the sets in the cabs anymore, all good, but they've got that little bit of time they can don. Maybe get the methods of entry gear off. Let's run a 52 mil out. Let's get our attack line. Two lengths in the one line to give you maximum sort of interior attack potential. OIC does the 360. Let's say, right, the fire's in, it's in the front room. Let's say front living room. We can say, thermal scan, it's in there. Okay, no windows open. Okay, I'll make a small entry. I'll open one of the quarter lights. Okay, so the OIC's doing that. Me BA wearers start your methods of entry work on the front door. Open it, but don't open it. Breach it, but don't open it. Keep it closed.
Yeah.
Get set, get ready. Let's, driver, charge the line. Line's charged. OIC can flow through the window. The BA crew done. Your objective, you're going to go in. We know the fire is immediately to the left. This is all easy stuff, Pete. I accept that. Go in, suppress the fire, then search the whole property. OIC, straight stream through the window, 30 seconds. You're knocking it right down. Knock it off. Immediately transition it to your pump. OIC can even do a bit of hose management for them as Team Alpha 1 goes in. They've got the brief. They're going in left hand search. They know the fire compartment's immediately to the left. Again, I know this is best case scenario, but in they go, put the fire out, knock it off, shut the door behind them. They can drop the branch at the door at that point, search, and they can ventilate as they go.
Yeah.
And you can build on that. You can build the complexity. That's what we should be doing on nights. That's what we should be sat.
It relies on a competent and aggressive form of BA deployment, though, and this is one of my frustrations when I work for an organisation travelling across the UK assessing firefighter apprenticeships for endpoint assessments, and BA seems to be getting a lot slower. So like you say, from that moment that you're opening up these compartments from what was a ventilation controlled fire, as an example, you're spending so goddamn long getting to that room of origin, just because it's a bit like pantomime. People are tick boxing the search procedures sometimes, and it tells me that you could teach a lot of this, and you still wouldn't get the outcome that you were hoping for, because people take so goddamn long to get to the room of origin these days, I think.
And the Dutch research shows that, which is why we're losing properties, which is why it's getting worse after we get there. Pete, how can that be right? How can that be right?
I know.
How can
It's a
that
horrible
be
thing to say, isn't it? It's getting worse after we get there.
You and I are having that discussion. You have highlighted the reasons
I know.
why. And I'm thinking, why aren't chief officer? Because you know what? If this isn't important, well, what is? If this isn't important, can you tell me what is? Because I don't know what it is. I don't. For me, it doesn't get any more important than that.
That's the attention at the minute goes to culture, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But
look,
I think we will be arguing with each other about how you have or haven't offended me whilst the building burns down is sometimes what's happening, and that sounds a little bit passive aggressive. So I should apologise for the listeners if it seems like I don't think there's value in that. There is value in that, but I think we're taking the eye off the ball.
The culture issue is huge. Nothing is diluting that.
Of course,
I'm not saying, and there is no place for the sort of behaviours that we're hearing about fire and rescue or any other organisation. There is no place for that. But I come back to the devil makes work for idle hands. You know, if what can we not just focus on our core, what we're here to do? Let's all get invested, because you know what? If people aren't interested in that, they're in the wrong job. Go and find another job. And if they're not interested in if they're not passionate about the sort of things we're talking about, well, they got no business being in the fire and rescue service then, have they?
I agree with you, mate, but I would give the argument of how much we are struggling with recruitment and retention now, and we can't rely on lots of ex-military people wanting to come into the job, because they're often fantastic operators. They're conditioned to a rate of work. They're good at following instruction, can assimilate training very quickly. We can't rely on people that are romantic and passionate about first responders or frontline operators as our base of recruitment now, which I think is one of the biggest challenges, because you clearly, retired a little while ago, are still very passionate about the job, hence why I say retired, hence why you continue your role in the emergency services in a different capacity. I worry, in total honesty, I worry about future recruitment and stuff like that. And it's kind of one of the reasons of the podcast is I want us to be proud of what we do. I want us to talk about it. I want us to be able to show our passion so that people that are interested in the first responder community have at least somewhere to go to be able to listen to passionate people such as yourself and hopefully feel inspired to come and be part of this great thing.
Amen to that, Pete. But I think, yes, clearly I am ex-military, but I know a lot of people, some fantastic operators out there that are here or in Australia, so that people are fantastic. I had the privilege to work with you who were not military, but absolutely shared the same values and thoughts as I do. Look, the point, let me just make clear what I'm saying. If you are in the fire and rescue service, surely you are joining the fire and rescue service to serve people. Surely that's got to be your motivation for joining. And therefore, surely you would want to do that to the very best of your own individual ability and the collective ability of the team. Surely, and if that's not what you're there for, then what? It's a rhetorical question. Then surely, what are you doing? What is it you're here for? Then, if it is not that, it's like any other public. I would expect that people were in policing for similar reasons, or the ambulance service.
And if you excuse the pun, if we had a greater emphasis on a high level of training, a high level of performance, that would fan the flame, if you excuse the pun, of people's desire to be a great, competent operator, to serve their community, and to be very good professional firefighter. If we had a greater focus on the level of training and level of competency of operators out there.
Look, I agree, and that is. For the time I was a chief officer, that's very much what I tried to. It is for others to judge whether I was successful at that. I'm in touch with many of the people that I served with in Melbourne. You've interviewed one of the people. I got Gerard Mann, you might recall. Absolutely.
Yes, Gerard. Yeah, I speak to him regularly.
He really good example of someone who's just absolutely committed, passionate, much like yourself, completely.
He's getting himself out there, bless him. I see he's at another high-rise conference next April, I think it is.
He's he is. He is indeed, yeah. But he and we speak often, and many of the other people that I work with, fantastic people, and just really motivated to the developments and the betterment of our service. I just feels to me like, and I say, the culture stuff, absolutely no one can. It's fundamentally important, and no one's suggesting to the contrary. But I do come back to say, ultimately, we are a fire and rescue service. That has to be is that delivery of we need to be good at what we do. Like I said, I think in the technical rescue space, I think we're really good. I think there's been lots of good developments, as I say, the likes of UCRO and people. It's fantastic work. The Institute of Tech Rescue and such like, really good stuff. A lot of good hazmat stuff, some really good multi-agency stuff going on out there. I just think the one area where we are some way behind now is in respect of actually our core business is the firefighting piece. But there is a load of research.
Resting on our laurels.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing's shifted since '94, and that the quote that you gave earlier, that was from a report from a guy called Lee Johnson, who was a senior officer in West Sussex Fire. And I've got to say, for me, it's probably the best articulation I've ever read of, really switched on guy, totally knew his stuff, and, tried a great deal to advance things with his sole motivation, much like mine. It's just, I one anecdote for you, I guess, as a personal anecdote, on the evening that Stephen Hunt lost his life in Greater Manchester, I was duty principal officer in Merseyside. I'm going to say it was probably about 9 o'clock that night. I get a call off the Merseyside Fire Control to say that the duty principal officer, I think it was Jeff Harris at the time, in Greater Manchester needs to speak to you. And my heart sank, Pete. There could only be one reason that he wanted to speak to me. I already knew what it was. They've lost someone at the job. Sure enough, that's what it was. And it was just never, ever in my life, never again do I want to, just get a phone call like that. I was deployed to Atherstone, headed up the USAR to do the body recovery. We were at Merseyside with it. We did one night shift there. So, and discovered, located one of the initial first firefighter, along with a crew from Hampshire, I'm going to say from memory. Horrific, absolutely horrific. Never again. I would do anything I could to avoid something like that ever happening again.
That's my fear. If we don't circle back and sort of recalibrate our focus on some of these things, these tragedies will become more frequent and more often for a few contributing factors. Not only everything you've articulated there, but also the aspect that we're going through a tremendous amount of retirement now. There's a colossal amount of experience being lost, and we're hemorrhaging it from the UK Fire and Rescue Services. As many people go into a very well-earned retirement or moving into different careers, we're doing so much recruitment. We're doing so much training of brand new firefighter development. So that's why I wanted to have someone such as yourself on. And I really hope you come back, to be honest, because I found so much value from our conversation today. Because creating a backing track for people to focus on things like this, I think is crucially important for us not to lose sight of the core purpose of why we exist.
Absolutely, Pete. Amen to that.
Is there any closing things you would like us to circle back to? I can edit this a little bit out, but is there anything? I'm looking over my list of notes. I think we've actually done a fantastic job of covering so much there. Is there anything you'd like us to circle back to before we look at closing?
Listen, I could talk forever, mate, on this stuff. So I think...
Hey, I'd love to have you back. It's been a real privilege. We've spoken for nearly 2 hours there, and I feel like we could go for another 4.
Yeah.
But I want to be respectful of your time.
No, I'm all good. Hopefully, was that okay? Did that give you something to work with?
We went in so many fantastic directions there, mate. You're an absolute cornucopia of knowledge. And I genuinely no bullshit, because we don't have to say this at the end of episodes. I would really love to, after we've recorded this and it comes out probably January or early Feb, because we've got about 32 episodes currently recorded. But I'd love once you've had a listen to it, because you'll do what everyone does, is you'll go, oh, can't believe we didn't talk about this, we didn't talk about that. Actually, I'd love to expand on this, or given what we spoke about. So maybe having a conversation again March or April of next year would be great if you found it a positive experience.
Yeah, for sure. But look, if you're doing great stuff here, anything we clearly occupy the same space, mate. We're clearly in it for the same.
Well, I'm an eternal student. We're occupying the same space, but you're several leagues ahead of me. I'm just trying to shortcut the system and make this accessible to people before they are 30 years deep, realizing they didn't know a lot of this stuff.
Do you know what we didn't speak about? Critical incident decision making and running big jobs, or running jobs, period. Maybe that's one for us to come back to.
We'll do it on a separate date.
Okay.
Dan, thanks so much for your time today, mate. I really, really appreciate it. And I sincerely look forward to having you on again, brother.
Thanks very much for having me, Pete. It's been a pleasure.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests. And as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.